Okay, good morning students. How are you today? I hope everyone is well. We will be starting your lessons in language learning today. I would like to start off, please, if you have your booklets with you, if you could open up on page 5, please. Page 5, we have the beginning. We have language learning in the early childhood. First of all, let's have a look at the preview together. In this chapter, we will look briefly at the language development of young children. So in this chapter, or at the beginning, we will be looking at young children's language development. We will then consider several theories that have been offered as explanation for how language is learned. Through this, we will look at different theories telling us or explaining to us how children learn a language. There is an immense amount of research on child language. يوجد هناك, or there is a lot of research or بحوث in language on children learning languages. Although much of this research has been done in the middle class North American and European families. So the geography here is maybe a little bit different from what you are used to, but nevertheless, it's an example that we will have a look at. There is a rich body of cross-linguistic and cross-cultural research as well. So we have multiple languages that we can dive into in these researches and multiple cultures that we can also have a look into. So there's a more diversity in these researches. Our purpose in this chapter, our goal, what we aim to do here, is to touch on a few main points in this research, primarily as a preparation for the discussion of second language acquisition. This is just to prepare us for the discussion of second language acquisition, which is the focus of this book. Now, we come to first language acquisition. Language acquisition is one of the most impressive and fascinating aspects of human development. So learning a language is something that is considered quite a big achievement. And it has fascinating aspects, a lot of things that you want to learn about in the human development. We listen with pleasure to the sounds made by a 3-month-old baby. You enjoy the little sounds that come from the young babies. We laugh and answer at the controversial ba ba ba. We always make jokes and laugh when babies try to speak, and all they do is just produce these sounds, ba ba ba. Babbling of older babies. And we share in the pride and joy of parents whose 1-year-old has uttered the first bye-bye. You know how it is, young parents and especially are always looking out for when their children, what their first words are going to be. Is it going to be mommy, daddy, bye-bye? And usually the first word is met with great jubilation and pride. Now, indeed, learning a language is an amazing feat. One that has attracted the attention of linguists and psychologists for generations. Yes, linguists and psychologists have been attracted to this phenomena of learning a language. How do children accomplish this? What enables a child not only to learn words, but to put them together in meaningful sentences? Yes, children don't just learn words, they learn how to put these words together and make meaningful sentences. And then they go on even more to make these sentences more personal by adding their own touches to these sentences and how they are created. What enables a child not only to learn words, but to put them together in meaningful sentences. What pushes children to go on developing complex grammatical language, even though their simple communication is successful for most purposes. Children can have successful communication most of the time about the things they need or the things that are around them. Why do you think they push themselves to learn even more complex structures and sentences? Why does that happen? Does child language develop similarly around the world? Do children have the same development in Different languages, do they all develop? This is something that we have a look at. How do bilingual children acquire more than one language? And a bilingual child is obviously a child that speaks two languages. Bi means two languages. Monolingual, one language. Bilingual, two languages. So how do children learn more than one language? Okay, now page 6, please, where we have the first 3 years. The first 3 years of a child's life. Milestones and developmental sequences. So we have the first 3 years. We will see what milestones and sequences the child will develop. One remarkable thing, please follow in the text, one remarkable thing about the first language acquisition is the high degree of similarity in the early language of children all over the world. This is something that we just touched on just earlier in the previous page, is that a remarkable thing or something that we should pay attention to about first language acquisition is the high degree of similarity. There's a very high degree of similarity, or it's very closely related the way children learn languages all over the world. So let's say if a child in Libya is learning a language, it has some similar features or similar aspects to a child learning a language, let's say in Italy or somewhere else. Researchers have described developmental sequences. Researchers are the people, or the bahithin, the people who are studying this, have described developmental sequences. What does this mean? It means that the development of the child or the language in the child comes in a sequence, in an order. It means that something happens and then follows, there is a specific order for the child to learn this language. For many aspects of first language acquisition, the earliest vocalizations, or the first الألفاظ الأولى للطفل, are simply the involuntary crying that babies do. It's just a scream or a cry that is involuntary, random, that they do when they are either hungry or uncomfortable. So, to begin with, babies make sounds. So children will make sounds when hungry or uncomfortable. This is very basic. These are the first sounds you will hear from the baby. The baby is making a sound. Why? It means that he or she is either angry or uncomfortable. Soon, however, we hear the cooing and the gurgling sounds of contented babies. Cooing اللي هو الهديل, gurgling اللي هي الغرغرة. These are the sounds that babies make when they are content, when they are happy. So when he is full, he's not hungry anymore, he'll be cooing or gurgling before he goes to sleep. Lying in their beds, looking at fascinating shapes and movements around them. Do you know when they are in their cribs or their small beds, they have like the toys at the top of them and they look at them, fascinating shapes and movements. Even though they have little control over the sounds they make. Remember now, babies at this stage, they have very little control over the sounds that they make. In these early weeks of life, infants are able to hear subtle differences between the sounds of human languages. And infants, babies who are still feeding from their mother, that's an infant, the difference between a baby and an infant, have a great capacity to distinguish the voice, not the voice of their mothers from those of other speakers. they also seem to recognize the language that was spoken around their mother. And they also know how do babies recognize their mothers. They recognize them by the sounds at first. How do they learn these sounds? Do you know that the babies, while inside their mother's stomach, are actually listening and learning? They know the difference between the sound of the mother and the father and someone else. Furthermore, in cleverly designed experiments, researchers have demonstrated that tiny babies are capable of very fine auditory discriminations. Researchers have shown that babies have the ability for very fine auditory discrimination. For example, they can hear the difference between sounds as similar as pa and ba. All right? They know how to distinguish between sounds from a very young age. Janet Verker and Patricia Kuhl and others have used new technologies that allow us to see how sensitive infants are to speech sounds. So we have Janet Verker and Patricia. They have used the new technologies which are available now, so we can see how sensitive infants are to speech sounds. So they can test the sensitivity of the infants to the speech sounds. What may seem even more remarkable, something that's even more extraordinary, is that infants stop making distinctions between sounds that are not phonemic in the language that is spoken around them. This is pretty remarkable, in that an infant will stop to distinguish between sounds that are not phonemic in the language that is spoken around them. It means if the child is learning French, he will listen only to those French sounds. Any other sound he will not register. If he speaks Arabic, he will continue to look for the Arabic letters and sounds and not listen to the English letters and the other sounds. This is pretty remarkable. For example, by the time they are a year old, when they are 1 year old, babies who will become speakers of Arabic, baby who's going to speak Arabic, who's going to learn Arabic, stop reacting to the difference between pa and ba. This baby, he doesn't register anymore the difference between the sounds pa and ba, because in Arabic it doesn't have it, it's redundant, don't need it, which is not phonemic in Arabic. Babies who regularly hear more than one language in their environment continue to respond to these differences. But if a baby is listening or hearing more than one language, if a baby is going to be bilingual, like we mentioned earlier, this doesn't stop. It continues. He can still continue to distinguish between the different sounds. In their environment, continue to respond to these differences for a longer period. Verker, Weiman, and Yoshida. One important finding is that it is not enough for babies to hear language sounds from electronic devices. One of the things we found, or the researchers found, that was very important is for babies, it's not enough for them to hear sounds from electric device, i.e., or for example, like television or radio. In order to learn or retain the ability to distinguish between sounds, they need to interact with the human speaker. So for the babies to have the ability to distinguish between sounds, babies will need to have an interaction with human beings, and they cannot interact with machines like radios or TVs. If you put the baby in front of a TV or a radio, he will listen only. There isn't an interaction. Babies or children learn a lot more through interaction. They like to see the human interface in front of them. They like to see what your body language is like. All these are important for babies to learn, or children to learn. Interaction. The internet abound with remarkable videos of infants reacting to language sounds. And you can search on the internet to see babies reacting to all kinds of sounds. I'm sure YouTube will be chock-block full of these types of videos. You can just jump on and just type in babies or infants reacting to language sounds, and there will be a plethora of examples for you. Whether they are becoming monolingual or bilingual children, and it depends if they are speaking one language or two languages or more. However, it will be many months before their own vocalizations begin to reflect the characteristics of the language or languages they hear. It will take them quite a while, a few months. So these, put this into perspective. These are babies and they have absolutely nothing to do except learn a language, and they need, and they basically, their memory card is empty, so they can put whatever they want, and they still need months before their vocalizations or the words that they are saying begin to reflect the characteristics of the language or languages they hear, and longer still before they connect the language sounds with specific meanings. So it will take months before their vocalizations start to make any kind of sense and begin to reflect the characteristics of the language they are learning. They start to use the language in the correct way. It means they will still need a lot of practice. So if you are just starting to learn a language and you think it's difficult, it's not. Babies take a long time and they have nothing to do. It's easier for them. So as an adult, don't be too hard on yourself. However, language they hear long before still they connect language sounds with specific meanings. However, by the end of their first year, most babies understand quite a few frequent repeated words. By the end of the first year, so they are now 1 year old, babies will understand quite a few frequently repeated words. Frequently repeated words, words which they hear over and over again in the language or languages spoken around them. Depends, sometimes your father and mother, they have different languages. Maybe your dad is Arabic, your mother is English, so baby can have two languages, bilingual or the one language. In either case, there will be words which are repeated. And these ones the baby will learn the quickest. In the language spoken around them. They wave when someone says bye-bye. They know that you have to wave when someone says bye-bye. They clap when someone says pat cake. They eagerly hurry to the kitchen when juice and cookies are mentioned. They run to the kitchen when you tell them, I have some chocolate cookies for you and some juice. All right, now, at 12 months, most babies will have begun to produce a word or two that everyone recognizes. After 12 months, or when the baby is 1 year old, we will start to recognize some of the words that they are producing. By the age of 2, most children reliably produce at least 50 different words, and some produce more. About this time, they begin to combine words into simple sentences. About when they are 2 years old, they start to put the words together into simple sentences. Mommy, juice. What he means here, mommy, could I please have some juice? But you can see this is how they begin to learn how to put the construct sentences together. The most important thing for him here is the meaning, and the most important person here is mommy. She's the one who's going to give me the juice. So I want juice and I want mommy to give me the juice. That's all. So this is the first stages of constructing sentences for children. And baby fell down when he hurt himself or when he knows he's in trouble. These sentences are sometimes called telegraphic, because they leave out such things as articles. We call them telegraphic for the reason they leave such things as articles, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs. Now this I'll pay attention to, and please, if I say to you, pay attention to this, I would like, it would be wise to either underline what I just said is important or put an asterisk next to it. It usually means that it's something that might be pop up in your exam. So for example here, I might ask you a direct question or on true or false, what is a telegraphic sentence, or why do we call these sentences telegraphic sentences? And your answer would be because they leave such things out as articles, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs. We recognize them as sentences. Well, I see that as a sentences. Why do you recognize it as a sentence? Because even though function words and grammatical morphemes are missing, we don't have the function words and the grammatical morphemes, the word order reflects the word order of the language they are hearing. The word order in which the sentence has been put reflects or shows you the word order of the language that you are hearing, and the combined words and the words together, when you put them together, have a meaningful relationship. There is a relationship of meaning that makes them more than just a list of words. Thus, for an English-speaking child, طفل اللي هو يتحدث لغة إنجليزية, kiss baby does not mean the same thing as baby kiss. Be careful, because they only just started constructing, and they make the sentences for something that is important for them, something that they need. So they don't have long sentences, they're always very, very small. Telegraphic, hence why they're called telegraphic. Therefore, if a child says kiss baby, it doesn't mean the same as baby kiss. It means something else. Remarkably, and the reason for that is because they have such small vocabulary, they are unable to express themselves properly. Remarkably, we also see evidence, even in these early sentences, that children are doing more than imperfectly imitating what they heard. And even now, at this early stage, we can see there's evidence there is evidence to support that even in the early sentences, that children are doing more than imperfectly imitating. They're not just imitating what they hear, there is something more going on. Their 2- and 3-word sentences, these sentences that they have, which are comprised of 2 or 3 words, show signs that they can creatively combine words. They show that these children have imagination and creativity, that they are thinking about the things they want to say, and maybe they want to say them something in a different way than the other, or than their friends. For example, more outside may mean, I want to go outside again, depending on the situation. If he was already outside and he mentioned this, then it probably means I want to go outside again. Depending on the situation, daddy, might mean daddy fell down, he hurt himself, or daddy dropped something fell from your hand, from your pocket. Or even, daddy, please do that funny thing where you pretend to drop me off your lap. You know, when the fathers pick up the children, they pretend they will drop them, and then they pretend they will drop children. Maybe that means as well. Also, depending on the situation. What this means is children, even though they still have 2 to 3 word sentences and the telegraphic, there is a sign that they are using creativity and imagination. Now, as children progress through the discovery of language, in their first 3 years, children, they make progress through discovering new aspects of the language in the first 3 years. There are predictable patterns. Predictable patterns. It means you follow predictable sequences or steps in the emergence. So and development of many features of the language. Yes, so I can now children. What this means is if children who are learning English will have a predictable pattern in the things that they will learn. For some language features, these patterns have been described in terms of developmental sequence. For some language features, examples in the language, these patterns have been described in terms of developmental sequence. Developmental sequence اللي هو التسلسل في النمو. We have a developmental sequence. Or stages من المراحل. To some extent, these stages in language acquisition are related to children's cognitive development. For example, children do not use temporal adverbs such as tomorrow or last week. Children still haven't grasped the idea of time as of yet. They have tomorrow or last week, they don't know. They live in the present until they develop some understanding of time. In other cases, the developmental sequences seem to reflect the gradual acquisition of the linguistic element. Now, in other cases, the developmental sequence reflects the acquisition or the slow acquisition of linguistic elements, such as expressing used for expressing ideas that have been present in the children's cognitive understanding for a long time. Sometimes children will have a lot of ideas that are in their mind and they can't wait to find the correct words to describe them. One of these examples could be put in when children talk about time. When they start to learn about time, they will have so much more to say. For example, children can distinguish between singular and plural long before they reliably add plural endings to nouns. Long before they add plural endings to nouns. So children know the single and plural even before they know how to use it properly. Plural endings to nouns. Correct use of irregular plurals, وأيضا استخدام الصحيح للirregular, such as feet, takes even more time and may not be completely under control until the school years. So even in children which is learning their first language, they still might face some problems when it comes to plural endings to nouns and the use of the correct irregular plurals such as feet and so on. All right, now that was the first 3 years of children. The first thing we said, children will make some sounds when they are hungry or uncomfortable. And we have developmental sequences which means children learn in stages. Have developmental sequences. You pay attention to what that exactly means, and children are able to make distinctions phonemic distinctions, and let's see, distinctions for distinctions, and we have and we have the phonemic sounds is when children distinguish between the language and the letters they hear, if it is in their language or if it's in another language that they don't need. That's the phonemic distinction. We talked about And then we went on. We said that children will take them a long time and many months to start before their own vocalizations start to reflect the language that they learned. And at 12 months, baby will have produced a word or two. So we have 12 months, 12 months, they produce one or two words. All right, that's at 12 months. And then by the age of 2, most children reliably produce at least 50 different words. By the age of 2. So 24 months, they produce 50 plus words. Okay, and then so at least 50 words. About this time they begin to combine words to make telegraphic sentences. The telegraphic sentences. And at this time, at this age, they begin to produce telegraphic sentences. Pay attention to telegraphic sentences, please. Why do we call them telegraphic sentences? Because they leave such things as articles, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs. Right? We understand them and we recognize them even though the function words and the grammatical morphemes are not missing. We recognize them because they have a meaningful relationship and we can understand what they mean. All right. Now, in the last paragraph, children progress through the first 3 years. They are predictable patterns in the emergence of development of many features of the language they are learning. Okay, now we talked about the development sequence and stages. Now, we will come and have a look at grammatical morphemes. Grammatical morphemes. In the 1960s, several researchers focused on how children acquire grammatical morphemes in English. In the 1960s, some researchers put their focus on how children acquire the grammatical morphemes in English. One of the best known studies was carried out by Roger Brown and his colleagues and students. So Roger Brown, along with some of his colleagues and students, carried out one of the best known studies. In a longitudinal study of the language development of 3 children. So we studied the language development in 3 children called Adam, Eve, and Sarah. They found that 14 grammatical morphemes were acquired. The findings from this research were that there are 14 grammatical morphemes were acquired in a similar sequence. In a similar sequence. There is stages والله التسلسل similar sequence. وين رحنا؟ Okay, now the list below, adapted from Brown's 1973 book, shows some of the morphemes they studied. We have a list below of the morphemes that they have studied. What do we have? Present, progressive, ing, mommy running, plural s, 2 books, irregular past forms, baby and went, Possessive S, daddy's hat, kupla, mommy's happy, and articles, lia, the, and a. Now, regular past, ed, third person, singular, simple and present, she runs, S, all right. Auxiliary B, he is coming. Brown and his colleagues found that a child who had mastered the grammatical morphemes at the bottom of the list. What did Brown and his colleagues find? That children who mastered, who were good, who were really, really good at the grammatical morphemes at the bottom. And were good at what? The morphemes at the bottom of the list. The regular, the third person, and the auxiliary. These ones at the bottom of the list. Also mastered those at the top. They were also very good or masters at the rest of these morphemes, the plural, the ing, and so on. But the reverse was not true. So if children were good or mastered these morphemes at the top of the list, this does not mean necessarily that they will master the ones at the bottom of the list, and vice versa. If you learn these, if you find children who have mastered these, they will automatically be the masters of the previous list. Thus, there was evidence of a developmental sequence. Now we have evidence that there is a developmental sequence. يوجد شنو أنا developmental sequence. We have the evidence for it. Or order of acquisition, ترتيب للاكتساب. However, the children did not acquire the morphemes at the same age or rate. الأطفال, they did not acquire them at the same age or at the same speed. Eve had mastered nearly all the morphemes before she was 2.5 years old. So Eve, one of the children, mastered them before she was 2.5 years old. 2.5 years old. While Sarah and Adam were still working on them when they were 3.5 or 4. So Eve learned them quicker. Sarah and Adam, they took longer to learn these grammatical morphemes. Brown's longitudinal work was confirmed in the cross-sectional study of 21 children. Brown's longitudinal work was confirmed in a cross-sectional study of 21 children. Jill and Peter de Villiers, 1973, found that children who correctly used the morphemes that Adam, Eve, and Sarah had acquired late were also able to use the ones that Adam, Eve, and Sarah acquired earlier. What did we find out from these? Children who used the morphemes correctly that Adam, Eve, and Sarah had acquired late. They acquired them after Eve, were also able to use the ones that Adam, Eve, and Sarah acquired earlier. The children mastered the morphemes at different ages, just as Adam, Eve, and Sarah had done. But the order of the acquisition was very similar. The important thing to understand here is we are talking about the developmental sequences or the order of the acquisition. We had a look at the 3 cases that we were studying, Adam, Eve, and Sarah, and we found that Eve learned them quickly, and then Adam and Sarah, they took longer to learn. When the research was done on other children, they found that some of them learned quickly in the same period as Eve. Some of them learned later, like Sarah and Adam. The thing that didn't change, or the thing that was similar, is that the developmental sequences, this proves that there are developmental sequences that we have to follow or the children follow. But there's a difference in the time of learning it takes them, but there is similarity in the order of the acquisition. Many hypotheses have been advanced to explain why these grammatical morphemes are acquired in the observed order. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of hypotheses and theories why children learn in this specific order. Researchers have studied the frequency with which the morphemes occur in parents' speech. How do we study this? How do we know how children acquire these? So people or researchers are going to study the parents' speech. How do their parents, their mothers and fathers talk to them, and what do they use, and how frequently do they use these words? The frequency in which morphemes occur in the parent's speech. The cognitive complexity of the meaning represented by each morpheme, not just how many times the parents use it, but the cognitive complexity. How complex or how difficult is it for the child to learn or to pick up this morpheme? Of the meaning represented by each morpheme, and the difficulty of perceiving or pronouncing them, and how difficult are they to understand, to perceive, to understand, and to pronounce them. In the end, there has been no simple, satisfactory explanation for the sequence, and most researchers agree that the order is determined by an interaction among a number of different factors. The difficulty in the end, there is no simple explanation that could satisfy everybody for these developmental sequences. But most researchers agree that the order is determined by interaction. This sequence is determined by the interaction between a child and the adult or other children, among a number of different factors. There are also other different factors which play a role. To supplement the evidence, or لكي ندعم evidence we have from simply observing children. These evidence that we have gathered is only from observing children. Some carefully designed procedures have been developed to further explore children's knowledge. We have developed or designed some more further procedures that have been developed to further explore children's knowledge of grammatical morphemes. One of the first and best known is the so-called WOG test. Now this test is very, very important to know how the developmental sequence in children are created. What is called the WOG test. It's developed by Jean Berko Gleason in 1958. In this test, children are shown drawings of imaginary creatures. Imaginary creatures, something out of science fiction, something out of space. Imaginary creatures with novel names. They give them novel names of people performing with novel names of people or people performing mysterious actions. For example, سبيل المثال, they are told, here is a WOG. Here is a WOG. Now, there are two of them. There are two, and they leave a space for the child to finish. Or, here is a man who knows how to bod. Yesterday, he did the same thing. Yesterday, he, and they leave that space for the child to make up. Or to give the answer. By completing these sentences, the first sentence, if you complete it with WOGs, what did we say? Here is a WOG. Now there are two of them. There are two WOGs. You have to understand, WOGs has nothing to do, it doesn't have a meaning. It's just there to show you that children understand certain aspects of the language. So if they use WOGs, embodied, because yesterday we were talking about it, children demonstrate that they know the patterns for plural and simple past in English by generalizing these patterns to words they've never heard before. They show that their language is more than just a list of memorized words, pairs such as book, books, nod, wa, nodded. By using this, WOGs and body, children demonstrate, what do they show you? That they know the patterns of plural, WOGs, they put the S there, and the simple past in English, bod, bodied. By generalizing these patterns, what did they do? They took these rules they know and they generalized them. to words they have never before. They show, because they don't know wogs and have never heard of bod before, but they use the plural on it and the past simple. They demonstrate that their language is more than just a list of memorized words, word pairs such as book, books, and nod and nodded. All right, okay, that was probably the first lecture. نحن مجمع موجودين في مجمع ليبيا للدراسات وقناة ليبيا الوطن بإذن الله. I hope you enjoy the lectures, and I'll see you for the second one.